Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Tonight we have a late night insight video on a Rogue perfumery creation by Manny Cross, who you guys know I really rate his work. And today we're going to talk about a very special fragrance because I would say this is probably my favorite Rogue fragrance that I do not have a full bottle of in the collection. And it is called Flora and Fauna. And actually, I'm going to do a fresh application for you guys. I know some folks like to see the spray happen. So we'll do a fresh application here, and I'll tell you what, it is beautiful. Hands down, without a doubt, if someone said, Ramsey, you can add one Rogue fragrance to the collection you don't own, Flora and Fauna would be it. I wouldn't even hesitate for one iota, one moment. This is an absolute stunner to me, without a doubt. Now, one thing I will say is that it is a shame that it is discontinued. It only came out in 2016. Already it kind of got the axe. And I think that Manny Cross, as a creator, just happens to have a way with creating Chypre fragrances. My 2 cents on it. It has to be innate. You know, it has to be something inside of him that he can just kind of feel the proper weighting. Maybe the fact that he used to be a chef plays a part into it. I pulled up a little bit of kind of background on Manny Cross, and he was a chef before he started doing perfumery, and just maybe the fact that he, you know, had a lot of experience in weighing different ingredients that go into cooking and has that similarity. I don't know, but I think there's definitely something that has taught him proper weighting in a fragrance that has played a pivotal role, like a kind of a pilot flying on instinct or something like that, rather than just using the controls. You know, I went on record previously in saying that Chypre Siam, and I will review this on the channel, I promise, just a matter of time, reminds me of Francois Coty's Chypre, the fragrance that basically got the Chypre genre started. And I took some flack for that statement, but I stand by it. I'm not saying it is as technically sound as, you know, the masters, Francois Coty's Chypre. I'm not saying Chypre Siam is like that at all, but what I would say is that I get just as much joy and happiness and, you know, just really just enjoyment out of wearing this Chypre Siam as I do the 1 or 2 ml sample someone sent me of Coty Chypre from back in the day, just from memory. I don't have a bottle of Coty Chypre. But, you know, it gives me a very similar scent memory, a similar scent association, if that makes sense. Obviously, there are some differences with Chypre Siam, but I have vowed to review Chypre Siam on the channel, and that will happen. And I will say, for somebody who wants to study a modern Chypre done well, Chypre Siam is one I can absolutely recommend. Conversely, Flora and Fauna is another out-and-out Chypre that I would say gives me a scent memory of what I would consider to be one of the greatest Chypre fragrances of all time, and that is Mitsouko. So we started with Chypre Siam and Francois Coty's Chypre, and now we're talking about Mitsouko. And also, I would even go so far as to add Diaghilev to the list, one of my all-time favorites. I have a Vintage Hall of Fame review on Diaghilev on the channel, and this will also get a Vintage Hall of Fame review in due time, once I kind of have the intestinal fortitude to review what many consider to be one of the greatest fragrances ever created. So, before all the Guerlain fans lose their minds, okay, I'm just saying, in construction and how it kind of wears on my skin, Mitsouko really feels like the inspiration for Flora and Fauna, in my opinion. I think Manny Cross was heavily inspired by Mitsouko, as many people were. Decades of perfumers were inspired by Mitsouko, so that really shouldn't surprise anyone. I'm not saying anything outlandish there, but that would be my comparison. Something like Mitsouko, which has that fruity side, and Diaghilev, which has that leathery side to it. Now, as I said earlier, Manny Cross makes fantastic Chypres and excellent Chypres. And I think Chypre Siam is kind of Exhibit A, because this came first. And Flora and Fauna, for me, would kind of be Exhibit B, in my opinion. It's a captivating Chypre. Now, very impressive work. Categorically, I would call Flora and Fauna a sort of mix between this leathery Chypre and this fruity Chypre. okay? And as soon as I began to sort of understand categories in my own fragrance journey, Orientals, Fougères, you know, citrus colognes, all this stuff, Chypre was the category that really captured my attention. It really captivated me because it was very mysterious. There was something very mysterious about Chypres, and they were usually very complex creations, meaning they gave you a lot to smell, okay? They gave you a lot to smell, and they can take them in different directions. You could have so many different types of Chypres. You could have the leather Chypres, animalic Chypres, floral Chypres, you know, the list goes on, right? And so the way that this fragrance basically opens up, Flora and Fauna, opens up with what I would consider this sparkling bergamot that just sets the tone for the whole fragrance to come, okay? It stimulates the rest of the fragrance in a way that's just mesmerizing to me. I was very harsh on Manny Cross's take on oud. I did a Rogue review on the channel probably within the last month or two called Oud Ancien, kind of like ancient oud in a way. And later on, after I dropped the video, someone in the comments left a comment that sort of made me chuckle a little bit, but they said Manny Cross went on record as saying that when he created Oud Ancien, that he had the virus that shut the whole world down a couple years ago. I don't want to say it because if I say it, there'll be some stupid pop-up below this video that, you know, will say, do you want to learn about proper information on this virus? So it seems like the collective world lost their mind in that moment. I would say I bashed Oud Ancien. I said it was one of the worst Rogue fragrances I've ever smelled. I stand by that as well. This review is going to make up for that a little bit, I think, because we went from what I would consider to be one of his worst creations ever, Oud Ancien, to what I think is one of his best creations ever. And it's sad that I can't switch the discontinued label and they can discontinue Oud Ancien and bring this back because this is really something special. Really something special. One of the best Rogues I've ever smelled. I mean, when your comparison is what many consider the greatest fragrance ever, Mitsouko, obviously, you know, you can give Manny his flowers, but you can't give him max points for creativity, but still, this is something special. Even though it's within the confines of vintage Chypres way gone past, this is something very special. So, once that beautiful sort of sparkly bergamot leads you down the runway, it isn't long before you realize that there are some differences to Mitsouko, okay? As I said, I think Mitsouko is an inspiration for this, but usually Manny Cross tries to kind of formulate his own flight path, if you will. And so instantly you realize there is a note you are smelling that will remind you very briefly of the peach that Mitsouko made so famous in the Chypre Accord, in the fruity Chypre Accord of Mitsouko. But it isn't peach in Flora and Fauna. Basically what he decided to do is he decided to use apricot. Now, apricots are sort of like peach's baby brothers. They're only about a quarter of the size, and most importantly, though, they're not as sweet or juicy as a peach. They famously have higher levels of malic acid, which basically make them more tart than a peach. So slightly bitter, slightly tart. If you've ever heard the term, excuse me, if you've ever heard the term candied peach in a fragrance, it's because of the sugary qualities and the taste and the smell of the peach accord from time to time. They can turn candied if they're not properly used. Here, the apricot note goes the opposite direction. So it almost feels slightly bitter and most importantly dry, like desiccated and dry. So if you've ever consumed a peach or an apricot and then you left the pit or the stone, as some folks call it, on the counter, at first they are moist, almost from like being surrounded by the flesh of the apricot inside of the fruit, of course. It's being protected in a way. But if you leave them on the counter and you come back a day or two later, the pit becomes sort of dry, brittle. They start to take on this crispy kind of look. They no longer have that healthy, hydrated feel. Now they seem almost like sun-baked. You know, all the moisture is kind of sucked out of them. And the reason going into the detail here matters is because that apricot note in Flora and Fauna really comes off as something that is a little bit of a separator from Mitsouko. If you've ever kind of been to the supermarket and seen dried apricot slices being sold, which I bought them before, they're damn good. But think of that minus the sweetness, because normally in the dried apricot that you're actually buying from the grocery store, they will put sugar in there in the composition, so to sweeten it up a little bit, because like I said, apricot can be very very bitter and tart in a way. So they'll add sugar on top, so you don't have that bitter aspect to them. And it's sort of a brilliant sleight of hand, I think, on Manny Cross's side of things, because if you know your fragrance history, your brain will be thinking about Mitsouko while you're smelling Flora and Fauna. And while the execution is somewhat similar, they will smell unique. It makes it smell different from Mitsouko. The other thing is the bit of civet that Manny Cross used here, and Flora and Fauna really starts to kind of make an appearance for me. While I'm attempting to kind of focus on that apricot note. So focusing on the apricot note, the bitterness of the apricot compared to the peach, and trying to make those kind of connections, that's when that kind of buttery sourness of the civet really starts to make itself known, which is kind of right now in the composition. And they kind of hit my nose at a similar pace. They're going at a very similar speed in the breakdown of the composition. And the two work brilliantly together. The bitterness of the apricot, the sour, sort of pissy, but I would say this civet used here is not very pissy. Some civet can come across as pissy, urinous, whatever you want to call it. Here, the civet comes across as like buttery sour, almost like the texture is butter like melted soft butter. But instead of having the taste of butter, it comes across as being slightly sour. That's kind of what the civet adds to this composition. And it does work brilliantly, I will say, with the apricot, okay? So, personally, I would have loved if they amped up the leather and the civet, because that's just my style. I love animalic fragrances. I love hardcore leather fragrances. But I think what Manny Cross did here is he kind of used the animalics and the leather in a way where somebody like me who loves these type of compositions can appreciate the work that it's doing in the composition, while someone who is the exact opposite of me and does not like the animalic side of things can wear this without kind of the civet ruining the fragrance for them. So it's basically dosed, I would say, in a very elegant way, okay? He dosed it with a very deft hand. Yes, you could say this is an animalic Chypre in one sense of the word. In the other sense of the word, I would still call this very elegant. Even though there's some animalics in here, I would say it's probably very easy to wear for most folks. Now, everyone's favorite part of the fragrance, of course, the leather. So for those of you whose ears kind of perked up whenever I said Diaghilev, I have often said Diaghilev to me, and you can go watch my full review if you want to see kind of a full breakdown on this, but Diaghilev for me is a mixture of Mitsouko and something like Azuree or Aramis or, Bandit or one of these, old school hardcore kind of leathery Chypres that's kind of butch, take no prisoners type leather Chypres of the past, the type I absolutely positively 100% adore. And I think there's something about Flora and Fauna that will hint to the leather fragrances of the past, okay? But this is where Manny Cross is thinking of trying to kind of keep it very modern, I think, really comes into play for me. If you want a leather that just is going to knock your socks off, just go buy a vintage bottle of Bandit or Azuree or something like that. The original Aramis, get a vintage, cologne version or something like that. The leather in Flora and Fauna, while it's still evident, you get it a little bit more into the dry down. While it's still evident, it isn't just this sweaty, sexualized leather that, feels like you've been locked in a room with your person for the whole weekend without air conditioning or something like that in the middle of summer. It isn't that type of sort of Baroque, hardcore, butch leather fragrance. Here, the leather is much more supple and soft, and it feels almost like nimble and agile, but also very thick at the same time. There's like, there's a softness to this leather. Like you can kind of squeeze it down, but it pops right back up. And think of like one of those new age leather bags that you pay an exorbitant amount of money for, right? It's not full grain leather that has, the deficiencies in the leather, or, you know, the imperfections, you could call it. Maybe like the animal has a scar in that part of the leather or something like that. Full grain leather is never going to be uniform, right? And nowadays, people demand uniformity. They don't like to see any sort of imperfections in their leather. So what they've come up with is they've come up with this sort of trick, if you will, where they take a piece of high-end leather and they do this texturing to it. Something like Saffiano leather is coming to mind, where they kind of cross stitch and it feels so soft and supple and all this stuff. But it's been kind of fortified, you know, with extra layers, or maybe like foam underneath or something, giving it that kind of soft, supple feeling. Very plump, soft and plump leather, okay? The civet here still adds a little bit of funk. But all in all, I think the Chypre kind of has 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the present. Very, very modern. It's a fragrance that I think Manny Cross specifically created it this way. And so it's vintage in style and execution, but there are some very sophisticated modern elements to it as well. That's the way that I would kind of describe Flora and Fauna. I would have loved for Manny Cross to just go full on scorched earth, no holds barred, animalic leather fragrance in the base. But the way everything kind of comes together in here is really a treat. I think, you know, you'll notice the leather in the base. You get the textured oak moss, the resins, the labdanum plays a big role here, which probably adds to the leathery creation. There's some amber, there's patchouli, of course. It's a Chypre, you're going to have some patchoulis. It just smells so classic and sort of represents the Chypre category brilliantly. I think this fragrance is a brilliant representation, like a modern, these two really fantastic modern representations of what a Chypre should be. You know, going to the past, of course, you could just grab something like Mitsouko. I mentioned Coty Chypre, which I'd love a bottle of one day. Now, before we close, though, there is one bit of information on Flora and Fauna that I've been kind of holding back that I think really makes this just an utterly amazing creation. And so, according to everything that I have read, this is 100% totally a natural creation, which is mind-boggling to me. When I found that out, I was like, wow, because the first time I wore this, I had no idea that that was the case. I like to test it a couple times before I do these videos. So this is the third time I've had a chance to wear this to bed. Never wore it as my scent of the day, just kind of wear it to bed, like you saw me kind of spray my wrists here. But what's shocking is, because I understand how hard it is to make 100% natural perfumery work well. Well, I'm not a perfumer, so I don't understand it personally, but it was described to me in detail by folks who are perfumers. And I feel like sometimes there needs to be some synthetics to kind of hold everything together, right? And so the fact that he can make this with 100% all natural materials is very impressive. I'll read you the little blurb that was put up. So it basically says, Flora and Fauna is a limited edition all-natural Chypre fragrance, so maybe it was meant to be a limited edition all along, blended with essential oils, absolutes, and extracts. Flora and Fauna is the result of Manny's study of natural perfumery. It was a steep learning curve. Mixing several natural components can easily turn to mud. And I think that's what puts so many people off of just 100% natural perfumery is there's like he said, a very steep learning curve. So without a thoughtful amount of restraint, things can go very, very wrong. The idea was to create the fantasy of what a Chypre fragrance may have been like long before the synthesis and production of modern aroma chemicals. Badass brief. Absolutely love it. Through and through. I think it's a 100% natural masterpiece. This is an example of 100% natural perfumery done well. Very impressive work. On the other hand, I would say, if there was one beef that I had with Flora and Fauna, it would be that I wish it lasted longer. I wish that as the hours ticked by, it didn't get softer and softer on my skin. That is my only beef that's the only thing I can complain about with this scent. I wish I could smell it for 12 hours like I could Diaghilev. Sometimes I could just take the lid off Diaghilev and smell it, and I swear to God, the scent profile just gets in my nostrils, you know, and I can smell it for minutes, 15, 20 minutes after I sniff it. It's unbelievable. So I wish Flora and Fauna had the kind of staying power Diaghilev has, but obviously Diaghilev is using a lot of synthetic materials that you're not finding in 100% all-natural recreation like Flora and Fauna is my guess. So for something so beautiful as flora and fauna, I would have no problem reapplying this throughout the day. The resins, the moss, the leathers, the civet, my guess is there's probably some florals in here that are just not listed. I don't know what those are, but my guess is there's probably some bouquet of florals in here that is just not listed in the note breakdown. But it truly is a brilliant job of showcasing, I would guess, the flora and fauna on the island of Cyprus, for example, where the oldest perfumery sort of base was ever found, where Aphrodite supposedly lays her head down on a bed of mosses, hence the Chypre kind of breakdown, if you will. And I have an entire, this is not a top 10 Chypre video for those of you that want to kind of go back and check out some of the Chypres from my collection. It's just a brilliant creation. And then the 100% natural side of things may also be why it was discontinued. It may be the fact that, these were limited materials and he knew he wasn't going to be able to continue to sort of have access to them. So he just did like a one-time limited edition thing and then discontinued it. And either way, whatever the thing is, hats off to Manny Cross for creating something like this. One of my favorite Rogue fragrances that I do not have a full bottle of in my collection. Fantastic work, and definitely makes up for the crash and burn session that was Oud Ancien. Really disappointed in that. I hope that it was like a one-off, and he if you watched my Oud Ancien video, he mentioned that he wanted to do 3 Oud fragrances, and Oud Ancien was just the first. So I'm hoping that the second and the third is a much stronger release from Manny Cross. But I don't remember who sent me this sample. So I think it may have been Angie. Or maybe she's just getting credit for everything nowadays because she sent me so many little one-off samples. But whoever my perfume god person was, thank you for sending this my way. It's been a joy getting to know flora and fauna. If you have any experience with this, do let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Manny Cross's house, Rogue, and of course Flora and Fauna, and more Rogue reviews to come, I promise. We will be reviewing stuff like this very soon. So thank you everyone for watching, commenting, liking, subscribing, coming up on 10,000 subscribers, which I cannot wait for. So cheers everyone, hope you have a great night, catch you next time, bye-bye.